All right, so I'm going to read The Big Bear of Arkansas. And there might be some times where I stop and tell you what some of these words mean because we don't talk like this anymore. This was written in 1854 by Thomas Baines Thorpe. And while they speak English, we do not usually talk this way. It's been a while, right? It's almost 200 years. All right, so this is called The Big Bear of Arkansas. A steamboat on the Mississippi, frequently in making her regular trips, carries between places varying from 1 to 2,000 miles apart. And as these boats advertise to land passengers and freight at all intermediate landings, the heterogeneous character of the passengers of one of these upcountry boats can scarcely be imagined by one who has never seen it with his own eyes. What he's talking about is whoever is on these boats. If you've never been on a steamboat before, you can't imagine all the different types of people that are on there. That's what heterogeneous means, different. Lots and lots of different people. Starting from New Orleans in one of these boats, you will find yourself associated with men from every state in the Union and from every portion of the globe, and a man of observation need not lack for amusement or instruction in such a crowd, if he will take the trouble to read the great book of character so favorably opened before him. Here may be seen, jostling together, the wealthy Southern planter and the peddler of tinware from New England, the Northern merchant and the Southern jockey, a venerable bishop and a desperate gambler, the land speculator and the honest farmer, professional men of all creeds and characters, Wolverines, Suckers, Hoosiers, Buckeyes, and Corncrackers, besides a plentiful sprinkling of the half-horse and half-alligator species of men who are peculiar to old Mississippi, and who appear to gain a livelihood by simply going up and down the river. In the pursuit of pleasure or business, I have frequently found myself in such a crowd. So the author has been up and down the Mississippi in steamboats. Though on one occasion, when in New Orleans, I had an occasion to take a trip a few miles up the Mississippi, and I hurried on board the well-known high-pressure and beat-everything steamboat Invincible, just as the last note of the last bell was sounding, and when the confusion and bustle that is natural to a boat's getting under way had subsided, I discovered that I was associated in as heterogeneous a crowd as ever was got together. As my trip was to be of a few hours' duration only, I made no endeavors to become acquainted with my fellow passengers, most of whom would be together many days. Instead of this, I took out of my pocket the latest paper, and more critically than usual examined its contents. My fellow passengers, at the same time, disposed themselves in little groups. So he's only going to be on the boat for a couple of hours, so he didn't want to really get involved with other people. So he's just going to read his newspaper and try to get out of people's business. While I was thus busily employed in reading, and my companions were more busily still employed in discussing such subjects as suited their humors best, we were most unexpectedly startled by a loud Indian whoop uttered in the social hall, that part of the cabin fitted off for a bar. Then was to be heard a loud crowing, which would not have continued to interest us, such sounds being quite common in that place of spirits, had not the hero of these windy accomplishments stuck his head into the cabin and hallooed out, "Hurrah for the Big Bear of Arkansas!" Then might be heard a confused hum of voices, unintelligible save in such broken sentences as horse, screamer, lightning slow, etc. As might have been expected, this continued interruption attracted the attention of everyone in the cabin. All conversation ceased, and in the midst of this surprise, the big bear walked into the cabin, took a chair, put his feet on the stove, and looking back over his shoulder, passed the general and familiar salute, "Strangers, how are you?" He then expressed himself as much at home as if he had been at the Forks of Cyprus, and perhaps a little more so. Some of the company, at this familiarity, looked a little angry and some astonished, but in a moment every face was wreathed in a smile. There was something about the intruder that won the heart on sight. He appeared to be a man enjoying perfect health and contentment. His eyes were sparkling as diamonds, and good-natured to simplicity. Then his perfect confidence in himself was irresistibly droll, meaning funny. Perhaps, said he, gentlemen, running on with without a person interrupting, perhaps you have been to New Orleans often. I never made the first visit before, and I don't intend to make another in a crow's life. I am thrown away in that our place, and useless, that our fact. Some of the gentlemen there called me green. Well, perhaps I am, said I, but I aren't so at home. And if I ain't off my trail much, the heads of them perlite chaps themselves weren't much the hardest, for according to my notion, they were real know-nothings, green as a pumpkin vine couldn't. In farming, I'll bet, raise a crop of turnips, and as for shooting, they'd miss a barn if the door was swinging, and that too with the best rifle in the country. And then they talked to me about hunting, and I laughed at my calling the principal game in Arkansas poker and high-low jack. So he's saying he's met some polite gentlemen who don't know the darndest about gardening or farming or hunting, and they laughed at him when he was asked about game. Now, they were referring to something that they would hunt, but he was talking about poker. Perhaps, said I, you prefer checkers and roulette. At this they laughed harder than ever and asked me if I lived in the woods and didn't know what game was. At this, I rather think I laughed. Yes, I roared, and says I, strangers, if you asked me how we got our meat in Arkansas, I'd have told you at once and given you a list of varmints that would make a caravan, beginning with the bear and ending off with a cat. That's meat, though, not game. Game indeed, that's what city folks call it, and with them it means chipper birds, and shite folks may be such trash living in my digging, but I ain't noticed them yet. A bird, anyway, isn't too trifling. I never did shoot at but one, and I never forgive myself for that had it weighed less than 40 pounds. I wouldn't draw a rifle on anything less heavy than that, and when I meet with another wild turkey of the same size, I will crap him. Crap means shoot, by the way, in this context. A wild turkey weighing 40 pounds, exclaimed 20 voices in the cabin at once. Yes, strangers, and wasn't it a whopper? You see, the thing was so fat that it couldn't fly far, and when he fell out of the tree after I shot him on striking the ground, he bust open behind, and the way the pound gobs of tallow rolled out on the opening was perfectly beautiful. So he's basically saying this is a huge turkey and it was really fat. Tallow is another word for fat. Where did all that happen? Asked a cynical-looking Hoosier. Happen? Happened in Arkansas. Where else could it have happened but in the creation state, the finishing up country, a state where the soil runs down to the center of the earth, and government gives you a title to every inch of it. Then its heirs just breathe them, and they will make you snort like a horse. It's a state without fault, it is. Excepting mosquitoes, cried the Hoosier. Well, stranger, accept them, for it is a fact that they are rather enormous and do push themselves in somewhat troublesome. But, stranger, they never stick twice in the same place. And give them a fair chance for a few months, and you will get as much above notice them as an alligator. They can't hurt my feelings, for they lay under the skin, and I never knew but one case of injury resulting from them, and that was to a Yankee. And they took worse to foreigners, anyhow, than they do to natives. But the way they used that fellow up, first they punched him till he swelled up and busted, and they separated, as the doctor called it, until he was as raw as beef. Then, owing to the warm weather, he took the auger, which is a cold, and finally he took a steamboat and left the country. He was the only man that ever took mosquitoes at heart that I knowed of. But mosquitoes is nature, and I never find fault with her. If there's large, Arkansas is large. Her varmints are large, her trees are large, her rivers are large, and a small mosquito would be of no more use in Arkansas than preaching in a canebrake. Now, this knockdown argument in favor of big mosquitoes used the Hoosier up, and the logician started on a new track to explain how numerous bear were in his diggin', where he represented them to be about as plentiful as blackberries and a little plentifuler. Upon the utterance of this assertion, a timid little man near me inquired if the bear in Arkansas ever attacked the settlers in numbers. No, says our hero, warming with the subject. No, stranger, for you see it ain't the nature of bear to go in droves, but the way they squander about in pairs and singles ones is edifying. And then the way I hunt them, the old black rascals know the crack of my gun as well as they know pigs squealing. They grow thin in our parts, it frightens them so, and they do take the noise dreadfully, poor things. That gun of mine is a perfect epidemic among bear. If not watched closely, it will go off as quick on a warm scent as my dog Bowie knife will. And that dog, woo, what the and then that dog, woo! Why, the fellow thinks that the world is full of bear. He finds them so easy. It's lucky he don't talk as well as think, for with his natural modesty, if he should suddenly learn how much he is acknowledged to be ahead of all other dogs in the universe, he would be astonished to death in 2 minutes. So this guy has got a dog, and his name is Bowie Knife. Do you remember talking about the Bowie Knife? Strangers, that dog knows a bear's way as well as a horse jockey knows a woman's. He always barks at the right time, bites at the exact place, and whips without getting a scratch. I never could tell whether he was made expressly to hunt bear or whether bear was made expressly for him to hunt. Anyway, I believe we were ordained to go together as naturally as Squire Jones says a man and a woman is when he moralizes in marrying a couple. In fact, Jones once said he, marriage according to law is a civil contract of divine origin. It's common to all countries as well as Arkansas, and people take to it naturally as Jim Doggett's Bowie Knife takes to bear. So now we've actually found out what the guy's name is. His name is Jim Doggett, and he owns a dog named Bowie Knife. What season of the year do your hunts take place? Inquired a gentlemanly foreigner, who, from some peculiarities of his baggage, I expect to be an Englishman, on some hunting expedition, probably at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. The season for bear hunting, stranger, said the man of Arkansas, is generally all the year round, and the hunts take place about as regular. I read in history that varmints have their fat season and their lean season. That is not the case in Arkansas. Feeding as they do upon the spontaneous productions of the sire, they have one continued fat season the year round. Though in winter, things in this way is rather more greasy than in summer, I must admit. For that reason, bear with us run in warm weather, but in winter they only waddle. Fat, it's an enemy of speed. It tames everything that has plenty of it. I've seen wild turkeys from its influence as gentle as chickens. Run a bear in this fat condition, and the way it improves the critter for eating is amazing. It sort of mixes the oil up with the meat till you can tell from which. I've done this often. I recollect one purty morning in particular of putting an old fellow on the stretch, and considering the weight he carried, he run well. But the dog soon tired him down, and when I came up with him, wasn't he in a beautiful sweat, I might say a fever. And then to see his tongue sticking out of his mouth a feet, and his side sinking and opening like a bellows, and his cheeks so fat that he couldn't look cross. In this fix I blazed at him and pitched me naked into a briar patch. If the steam didn't come out of the bullet hole 10 foot in a straight line, the fellow, I reckon, was made on the high pressure system, and the lead sort of bust his boiler. That column of steam was rather curious, or else the bear must have been very warm, observed the foreigner with a laugh. Stranger, as you observed, the bear was warm, and the blowing off of the steam showed it, and also how hard the varmint had been run. I have no doubt if he had kept on 2 miles further, his insides would have been stewed, and I expect to meet with a varmint yet of extra bottom that will run himself into a skinful of bear's grease. It is possible much unlikelier things have happened. Whereabouts are these bears so abundant? Inquired the foreigner with increasing interest. Why, stranger, they inhabit the neighborhood of my settlement, one of the prettiest places on old Mississippi, a perfect location and no mistake. A place that had some defects until the river made the cut off at Shirt Tail Bend, and that remedied the evil as it brought my cabin on the edge of the river, a great advantage in wet weather, I assure you, as you can now roll a barrel of whiskey into my yard in high water from a boat as easy as falling off a log. It's great improvement as toting it by land in a jug as I used to do. Evaporated it too fast and it became expensive. Just stop with me, stranger, a month or two or a year if you like, and you will appreciate my place. I can give you plenty to eat, for beside hog and hominy, you can have bear ham and bear sausages and a mattress of bear skins to sleep on and a wildcat skin pulled off a hole stuffed with corn shucks for a pillow. That bed would put you to sleep if you had the rheumatics in every joint in your body. I call that bed a quietus. Have you ever had hominy? Do you know what hominy is? It's like oh, what's the word? It's corn, and it's not my favorite kind of corn. Excuse me. Then look at my preemption. The government ain't got another like it to dispose of. Such timber and such bottomland. Why, you can't preserve anything natural you plant in it unless you pick it young. Things there will grow out of shape so quick. So he's really talking about the soil and how awesome Arkansas is and growing things there. I once planted in those diggings a few potatoes and beets. They took a fine start, and after that, an ox team couldn't have kept them from growing. And about that time, I went off to old Kentuck on business and did not hear from them things in 3 months. When I accidentally stumbled on a fellow who had crafted it at my place, which means spent the night at, with an idea of buying me out. How did you like things? Said I. Pretty well, said he. Cabin is convenient and the timberland is good, but that bottomland ain't worth the first red cent. Why? Said I. 'Cause, he said. 'Cause what? Said I. 'Cause it's full of cedar stumps and Indian mounds and can't be cleared. Lord, said I, them aren't Indian mounds. Them are tater hills. As I had expected, the crop was overgrown and useless. The soil is too rich, and planting in Arkansas is dangerous. I had a good-sized sow killed in the same bottomland. The old thief stole an ear of corn and took it down to eat while she slept at night, while she left a grain or two on the ground and lay down on them. And before morning, the corn shot up and the percussion killed her dead. I don't plant any more. Nature intended Arkansas for a hunting ground, and I go according to nature. The questioner, who had thus elicited the description of our hero's settlement, seemed to be perfectly satisfied and said no more. But the big bear of Arkansas rambled on from one thing to another with a volubility perfectly astonishing, occasionally disputing with those around him, particularly with a live sucker from Illinois, who had the daring to say that our Arkansas friend's stories smelt rather tall. The evening was nearly spent by the incidents we have detailed, and conscious that my own association with so singular a personage would probably end before morning, I asked him if he would not give me a description of some particular bear hunt, adding that I took great interest in such things, though I was no sportsman. The desire seemed to please him, and he squared himself round towards me, saying that he could give me an idea of a bear hunt that was never beat in this world or any other. His manner was so singular that half his story consisted in his excellent way of telling it, the great peculiarity of which was the happy manner he had of emphasizing the prominent parts of his conversation. As near as I can recollect, I have italicized the words and given the story in his own way. Stranger, said he, in bear hunts I am numerous. Now which particular one, as you say, I shall tell, puzzles me. There was the old she-devil I shot at the hurricane last fall. Then there was the old hog thief I popped over at the Bloody Crossing. And then yes, I have it. I will give you an idea of a hunt in which the greatest bear was killed that ever lived, none excepted. But an old fellow that I hunted more or less for 2 or 3 years. And if that ain't a particular bear hunt, I ain't got one to tell. But in the first place, stranger, let me say I'm pleased with you because you ain't ashamed to gain information by asking and listening. And that's what I say to Countess's pups every day when I'm home. And I have got great hopes for them pups because they are continually nosing about. And though they stick it sometimes in the wrong place, they gain experience anyhow, and they learn something useful to boot. Well, I was saying about this big bear. You see, when I and some more first settled in our region, we were driving to hunt naturally. We soon liked it. And after that, we found it an easy matter to make the thing our business. One old chap who had pioneered before us gave us to understand that we had settled in the right place. He dwelt upon its merits until it was affecting him and showed us, to prove his assertions, more scratches on the bark of the sassafras trees than I ever chalk marks on tavern door election time. So he's talking about claw marks on a particular type of tree. So who keeps that, I reckon, said I. The bear, said he. What for, said I. Can't tell, said he, but so it is. The bear bite the bark and wood too at the highest point from the ground they can reach. And you can tell by the marks, said he, the length of the bear to an inch. Enough, said I. I've learned something here already, and I'll put it into practice. Well, stranger, just 1 month from that time, I killed a bear and told it its exact length before I measured it by those very marks. And when I did that, I swelled up considerably. I've been a prouder man ever since. So I went on laming something every day till I was reckoned a buster and allowed to be decidedly the best bear hunter in my district. And that is a reputation as much harder to earn than to be reckoned first man in Congress, as an iron ramrod is harder than a toadstool. Do the varmints grow over cunning by being fooled with by greenhorn hunters, and by this means get troublesome? They send for me, as a matter of course, and thus I do my own hunting, and most of my neighbors. I walk into the varmints, though, and it has become about as much the same to me as drinking. It is told in 2 sentences. A bear is started, and he is killed. The thing is somewhat monotonous now. I know just how much they will run and where they will tire, how much they will growl, and what a thundering time I will have in getting their meat home. I could give you the history of the chase with all the particulars at the commencement. And I know the sign so well, stranger, I'm certain. Once I met with a match, though, and I will tell you about it, for a common hunt would not be worth relating. So how good is he at hunting? Really good. On a fine fall day, long time ago, I was trailing about for bear, and what should I see but fresh marks on the sassafras tree, about 8 inches above any in the forest that I knew of. Says I, them marks is a hoax, or it indicates that bear that was ever grown. In fact, stranger, I couldn't believe it was real, and I went on. Again, I saw the same marks at the same height, and I knew the thing lived. That conviction came home to my soul like an earthquake. Says I, here's something of purpose for me. That bear is mine, or I give up the hunting business. The very next morning, what should I see but a number of buzzards hovering over my cornfield? The rascal has been there, said I, for that sign is certain. Sure enough, on examining, I found the bones of what had been as beautiful a hog the day before as ever raised by a buckeye. And I tracked the critter out of the field to the woods, and all the marks he left behind showed me that he was the bear. Well, stranger, the first fair chase I ever had with that big critter, I saw him no less than 3 distinct times at a distance. The dogs run him over 18 miles and broke down. My horse gave out, and I was nearly used up as a man can be, made on my principle, which is patent. Before this adventure, such things were unknown to me as possible, but strange as it was, that bear got me used to it before I was done with him, for he got so at last that he would leave me on a long chase quite easy. How he did it, I never could understand. That a bear runs at all is puzzling, but how this one could tire down and bust up a pack of hounds and a horse that were used to overhauling everything they started after in no time was past my understanding. Well, stranger, that bear finally got so sassy that he used to help himself to a hog off my premises whenever he wanted one. The buzzards followed after what he left, and so between bear and buzzard, I think I rather got out of pork. Well, missing that bear so often took hold of my vitals, and I wasted away. The thing had been carried too far, and it reduced me in flesh faster than an auger. I would see that bear in everything I did. He hunted me, and that too, like a devil, which I began to think he was. Well, in this shaky fix, I made preparations to give him a last brush and then be done with it. Having completed everything to my satisfaction, I started at sunrise, and to my great joy, I discovered from the way the dogs run, they were near him. Finding his trail was nothing, for that had become as plain to the pack as a turnpike road. On we went, and coming on an open country, what should I see but the bear very leisurely ascending a hill, and the dogs close at his heels, either a match for him this time in speed, or else he did not care. On we went, and coming on an open country, what should I see but the bear very leisurely ascending a hill, and the dogs close at his heels, either a match for him this time in speed, or else he did not care to get out of their way. I don't know which, but wasn't he a beauty, though? I loved him like a brother. On he went until he came to a tree, the limbs of which formed a crotch about 6 feet from the ground. Into this crotch he got and seated himself, the dogs yelling all around it, and there he sat eyeing them as quiet as a pond in low water. A greenhorn friend of mine, in company, reached shooting distance before me and blazed away, hitting the critter in the center of his forehead. The bear shook his head as the ball struck it, and then walked down from that tree as gently as a lady would from a carriage. 'Twas a beautiful sight to see him do that. He was in such a rage that he seemed to be as little afraid of the dogs as if they had been sucking pigs, and the dogs weren't slow in making a ring around him at a respectful distance. I tell you, even Bowie Knife himself stood off. Then the way his eyes flashed, while the fire of them would have singed a cat's hair. In fact, that bear was in a wrath all over. Only one pup came near him, and he was brushed out so totally with the bear's left paw that he entirely disappeared, and that made the old dogs more cautious. In the meantime, I came up and, taking deliberate aim as a man should do at his side, just back of his foreleg, if my, I don't know what that is, did not snap. Call me a coward, and I won't take it personal. Yes, stranger, it snapped, and I could not find a cap about my person. While in this predicament, I turned around to my old friend Bill. Says I, you're a fool. You might as well have tried to kill that bear by barking the tree under his belly, as to have done it by hitting him in the head. Your shot has made a tiger of him, and blast me if a dog gets killed or wounded when they come to blows, I will stick my knife into your liver. I will. My wrath was up. I had lost my caps. That's part of my musket, by the way. My gun had snapped. The fellow with me had fired at the bear's head, and I expected every moment to see him close in with the dogs and kill a dozen of them at least. In this thing I was mistaken, for the bear leaped over the ring formed by the dogs and giving a fierce growl, was off the pack, of course, in full cry after him. The run this time was short, for coming to the edge of the lake, the varmint jumped in and swam to a little island in the lake, which it reached just a moment before the dogs. I'll have him now, said I, for I had found my caps in the lining of my coat. Let me start that one over again. Sorry. I'll have him now, said I, for I had found my caps in the lining of my coat. So, rolling a log into the lake, I paddled myself across to the island, just as the dogs had cornered the bear in a thicket. I rushed up and fired at the same time the critter leaped over the dogs and came within 3 feet of me, running like mad. He jumped into the lake and tried to mount the log I had just deserted, but every time he got half his body on it, it would roll over and send him under. The dogs, too, got around him and pulled him about, and finally Bowie Knife clinched with him, and they sunk into the lake together. Stranger, about this time I was excited, and I stripped off my coat and drew my knife, and intended to have taken a part with Bowie Knife myself when the bear rose to the surface. But the varmint stayed under Bowie Knife, came up alone, more dead than alive, and with the pack came ashore. Oh, thank God, said I. The old villain has got his deserts at last. Determined to have the body, I cut a grapevine for a rope and dove down where I could see the bear in the water, fastened my rope to his leg, and fished him with great difficulty ashore. Stranger, may I be chawed to death by young alligators if the thing I looked at wasn't a she-bear and not the old critter after all. The way matters got mixed on that island was unaccountably curious, and thinking of it made me more than ever convinced that I was hunting the devil himself. I went home that night and took to my bed. The thing was killing me. The entire team of Arkansas in bear hunting acknowledged himself used up. The fact sunk into my feelings as a snag boat will in the Mississippi. I grew as cross as a bear with 2 cubs and a sore tail. The thing got out among my neighbors, and I was asked how come on that individual that never lost a bear when once started. And if that same individual didn't wear telescopes when he turned a she-bear of ordinary size into an old he-one a little larger than a horse. Perhaps, said I. Friends, getting wrathy, perhaps you want to call somebody a liar? Oh, no, said they. We only heard of such things being rather common of late. But we don't believe one word of it. Oh, no. And then they would ride off. It was too much, and I determined to catch that bear, go to Texas or die, and I made my preparations according. I had the pack shut up and rested. I took my rifle to pieces and fled it, cleaned it. I put caps in every pocket about my person for fear of the lining. I then told my neighbors that on Monday morning, naming the day, that I would start that bear and bring him home with me, or they might divide my settlement among them, the owner having disappeared. Well, stranger, on the morning previous to the great day of my hunting expedition, I went into the woods near my house, taking my gun and bowie knife along, just from habit, and there sitting down, also from habit, what should I see getting over my fence but the bear? Now I need to point out to you something. What this guy is doing. He's sitting down from habit. He's using the restroom. Okay? It's because it's morning. Okay? That's what you do when you wake up. You go to the bathroom. All right. Yes, the old varmint was within 100 yards of me, and the way he walked over that fence, stranger, he loomed up like a black mist. He seemed so large, and he walked right towards me. I raised myself, took deliberate aim, and fired. Instantly, the varmint wheeled, gave a yell, and walked through the fence as easy as fallen tree would through a cobweb. I started after, but was tripped up by my inexpressibles. That's his underwear, which either from habit or the excitement of the moment were about my heels. And before I had really gathered myself up, I heard the old varmint groaning like 1,000 sinners in a thicket nearby. And by the time I reached him, he was a corpse. Stranger, it took 5 black folks and myself to put that carcass on a mule's back, and old Long Ears waddled under his load as if he was foundered in every leg of his body, and with the common whopper of a bear he would have trotted off and enjoyed himself. 'Twould astonish you to know how big he was. I made a bedspread of his skin, and the way it used to cover my bear mattress and leave several feet on each side to tuck up would have delighted you. It was, in fact, a creation bear, and if it had lived in Samson's time and had met him in a fair fight, he would have licked him in the twinkling of a dice box. But, stranger, I never liked the way I hunted him and missed him. There's something curious about it that I can never understand. And I never was satisfied at his giving in so easy at last. Perhaps he had heard of my preparations to hunt him the next day, so he just give up like Cotton Scott's coon to save his wind to grunt with his dying. But that ain't likely. My private opinion is that that bear was an unhuntable bear and died when his time come. When this story was ended, our hero sat some minutes with his auditors in grave silence. I saw there was a mystery to him connected with the bear whose death he had just related that had evidently made a strong impression on his mind. It was also evident that there was some superstitious awe connected with the affair, a feeling common with all children of the wood when they meet with anything out of their everyday experience. He was the first one, however, to break the silence, and jumping up, he asked all present to liquor before going to bed, a thing which he did, with a number of companions, evidently to his heart's content. Long before day, I was put ashore at my place of destination, and I can only follow with the reader in imagination our Arkansas friend and his adventures at the forks of Cypress on the Mississippi.